Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.
Now, Jan, I know you felt outnumbered by the ledger of non-accountants. Ledger.
Oh, that's very good,
that have been on the show recently, so it's about time we put that right. So we welcome Wang all the way from Sydney in Australia to the show today, and we'll be talking to him about corporate reporting, greenwashing and materiality, and I hope telling me what materiality means in this context.
Indeed, and materiality is at the heart of so many decisions about what kind of information companies produce. So it's a really important concept. And we've sort of obliquely thought about materiality in some of the earlier podcasts, but I thought it was really great to have an in-depth look at it here. I should also say, even though Dee is in Australia, he's a colleague of ours from Lancaster, and so he's over there working at the moment.
Yes, he is a member of your team and who's just managed to, as he described it to us, escape the British winter.
You can't blame him.
It's really hard to find a reason why he wouldn't want to do that. Dee, welcome very much to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on this podcast. It's really my pleasure. Yeah, as Jan has said, I presented a paper in Sydney a few days ago, but I work at the management school and a member of the Pentland Centre.
We've had few accountants on the podcast before, and so what I think our listeners are starting to appreciate is that accountants do all sorts of things, and there are all sorts of flavours of accountant within academia. With this in mind, I'd love to hear how you think about the accounting craft and in terms of informed by your particular perspectives on what accountants do, what accountants produce, and what that might mean.
That's a very big question. So so in terms of the role that accounting can play in society, it's a situational question. At a field level, a lot of people can see accounting as a form of accountability and think about whether accountability can drive positive corporate actions. That's a possibility. And also, if you look at the field level and over the field level changes over a longer period of time, and materiality, for example, it evolved from a technical concept to currently as a talking point that attracted a lot of interested parties into the debate of sustainability and in some way increase the awareness of sustainability. And from this point of view, and if we can define accounting broadly, and I feel it can work as a force for good. But if we narrowly define accounting and reduce it to a written form sustainability reports, and then my view on it is negative. So since the start of my PhD, I think in total I've conducted around 200 interviews, with corporate representatives, with various stakeholders, and very few of them told me that they will actually rely on the information from the written form reports to make decisions. So I really doubt if even now I still don't have sufficient evidence to show that there is a great demand for the written form corporate reports. Yeah, it depends. If accounting can be defined broadly, and I feel it can play a very positive role. Yeah, but the more micro level of accounting as a reports, and then I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think that's really nice to have that not sure as a starting, because we're all not sure about a lot of stuff, which is quite important. When you say the field level, perhaps you could say for our listeners what you mean by that.
The field level, means the changes in the accounting policies and this kind of changes. Previously, for example, when I just started my PhD, the GRI was seen as a key actor, as a standard setter influencing the debate. But now I feel as more and more standard setters and even the European Commission and a few even more influential regulators joining the debate, the influence of the GRI is now somewhat diluted. So this is what I mean by the field level changes and evolution.
looking for another definition. What's the GRI?
I'm
happy for you, Dee, or for you, Jan, to answer me that. I'm going to have lots of questions during this entire show, which is, what does this mean? What does that mean?
I'll leave it with you, Dee, because you know as.
Sorry, it's Global Reporting Initiatives. I think it was founded in the late 90s in Netherlands. It played a major role in terms of influencing corporate sustainability reporting. Yeah, it played a very important role until now. But what I mean is that now more and more, I tend to call them super or meta regulatory bodies. There are some regulators beyond the field of sustainability reporting. Now they show interest in sustainability and reporting, and then joined this debate, like what I mentioned, European Commissions, like several other finance regulators, IOSCO, when they joined the debate, GRI, although still important, but it's only one of the standard setters. This is what I mean.
Could it be said then that the GRI was maybe the start of sustainability and accounting coming together in some form? Was that the start of the process that has been built upon by these other regulators and everything being involved in it now?
Yeah, I think GRI was a very important player from the start. But if you ask me who initiated sustainability reporting in the first place, I think there are some large companies did it before GRI was established.
That's interesting to me. That's actually companies taking the initiative.
Yeah, and in the 1990s, there was quite a lot of quite novel reporting. In some ways, some of the reporting has become, as it's become more formalised and as companies have shifted it maybe from their operations to their communication division, it has sort of become quite ossified in a way. But in the early 90s, there was some amazing reporting. And so, for example, in the electricity industry in the UK, there was fantastic reporting at the moment at which the electricity utilities were privatised. People kind of in the firms realised that had been doing, if you like, public pollution for public benefit, but now they were doing public pollution for private benefit. And the engineers in their environmental management sections felt they had to provide an account of what they were doing. And so that was, if you like, one of the impetuses for some very early reporting. And then as it proliferated in all sorts of other fields as well, the Global Reporting Initiative was quite important for codifying and becoming, if you like, the standard setter for, if you're going to do it voluntarily, how you do it.
So did something like the GRI use these companies and what they'd already done as the basis for what they set up? Or was it just they set something up based on entirely different things?
Both, a bit of both. So existing practice was drawn together and formalised, but then they also did a really amazing global consultation about what should be there as well. So it was both normative in terms of what should be there, but also descriptive in terms of what had been there in the past. And they remain a really important part of the standard setting process, in particular because they look at impact materiality.
The what now?
What now? I knew you were going to catch you out there. So that's where we're heading. So they have a particular take on what kind of information ought to be provided, but also how do you decide what matters in this context?
I don't know how long you've been an accountant for, Jan. Were you in accountancy back in the 90s when all this was happening?
That's a very sensitive and carefully framed question. Yes, I was accountant in the 1980s and was there at the start of it all. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. So did you see this happening as, if you weren't at one of the companies that was at the forefront of this, did you see this happening even then? Or was it something that only really became obvious to accountants as a whole later on? I mean, Dee might be able to answer this as well as you.
During the 1990s, Dee was a young and youthful man and probably can't remember the details of it.
I was just born.
So, the other thing that happened in the 1990s, which was kind of interesting, is that the Association of Certified Chartered Accountants set up quite early on, about 91, 92, an environmental reporting awards scheme. And what they did there is, if you like, they listed companies as to, shortlisting, and then there were prize winners. Remarkably close to, if I can say it, Benchmarking.
The word benchmarking had already come into my head, Jan, as soon as you started talking about, and they started listing, they started benchmarking. The first thing they thought to do was benchmark.
And what was interesting about that is that the benchmark criteria were, I developed them. And so in that respect, it was kind of about, again, aspirational and descriptive. So I had things in the criteria that no one was ever going to do, but I wanted to sort of prompt people to think about them. That whole process of having an award seemed to attract other people to be involved. And certainly I kind of think about it as management by in-flight magazine. So the CEO goes, why am I not on this list? And so that sort of had a sense of creating curiosity and helped push open reporting. And so I've got photos from the first awards scheme, and there was a dot matrix printed banner, which you have to be old to know what they look like, and it was stapled to a curtain for the backdrop. And then by the end of it, Tony Blair was doing the awards at the British Library and the British Museum, etc. So it really transformed people's expectations.
So then today, you've not quite been in accounting for as long as Jan has. Was it a more concrete, established thing then when you became involved in accounting? Was it like, as Jan was saying, there were a lot more people involved, a lot more high profile? Was that the case when you started to become involved in accounting?
I don't have a good answer for that because an important part of my research is about materiality. But if we look at the materiality debate, the interested parties joined this debate. Most of them are not accountants. So, I feel this question, I saw this question, but it's outside of my core expertise, to put that way.
Right.
And maybe that's the time, Paul, for all your questions about materiality.
Right. Yeah. Starting with, please can you tell me what materiality means?
Well, the point is it has no meaning. It's a boundary object. It's a talking point. So this kind of relates to your earlier point about the stage of development of the field. So sustainability reporting is still a very early stage phenomenon, which is different from financial accounting and auditing. In a context of financial accounting and auditing, that's been a long history, and a lot of consensus has already been reached about the concepts like materiality. So materiality in auditing or in financial accounting, that is an easy answer. Materiality in that context means a filter or a threshold, above which things will be seen as significant and should be disclosed to the public. But sustainability reporting, as I said, is still a very early stage phenomenon, and a lot of interest groups join this debate. So they have their own interpretation of materiality. So I feel it's more interesting to ask why everyone is talking about materiality, why materiality attract so many interested parties, than asking what is the meaning of materiality, because different people have different interpretations. Though this field has not evolved to a stage where the consensus has already been reached.
Okay, never let it be said I'm not interesting. So let's ask that interesting question. Why are more people, more organisations, more individuals becoming interested in and attracted to the area of materiality?
Because materiality, as Dee's described it, an object or a piece of information is seen to be material if knowing about it would cause you to change your mind. And so if you like, it's one of those real sort of core things that sit behind decisions about disclosure of information. But of course, knowing about something comes in many different forms. So it might be knowing about, for example, the impact that your activities might be having on the natural environment, or it might be knowing about the extent to which your reliance on a certain resource creates financial risk for the organisation. And they are quite different things, and they're called different sort of forms of materiality. So the materiality choice comes down to maybe what topics a company might provide information on, but then also what dimensions of those topics would have information provided about them. So And because there are many topics and many dimensions, you start to see why Dee would describe them as a talking point or a boundary object. And boundary object is a concept within some fields of study. So if you like, it allows everyone to somehow participate in the conversation, but is quite a loosely, fuzzy, defined concept. So that's where materiality sits. It allows maybe you and I to have a conversation about it, even though we're talking about slightly different things from slightly different perspectives. Does that make sense?
Seems to be to just about sum up every conversation we ever have.
Well, that's probably true. With that in play, can you tell us about, you talked about financial materiality, so the kind of information that would be required in financial reports for somebody to be able to have the knowledge they need to perhaps change their mind. Can you talk us through impact materiality, double materiality, and dynamic materiality?
Before Dee does that, are you just making up phrases?
No, I promise.
So impact materiality is more aligned with the direction that the GRI is pushing for. It highlights that companies need to disclose their impact. So it's focused on corporate impact on social and environmental issues. The double materiality is broader. It means both. The company's impact on the environment is as important as how the social and environmental issues will also impact upon the corporate financial performance. So it highlights both angles. Dynamic materiality, means that things will change over time, and the corporate impact at a later point may come full circle back to influence the company's financial performance.
And I've often heard that described as people saying, they sometimes say an item is pre-material, and that at the moment it might not seem that it matters, but say the law changes or consumer taste changes, suddenly that aspect will matter. And if you think about, having battery chickens raised in cages, that wasn't a material consideration at some time in the past, but it would be a material consideration now. So you get the sense of this dynamism of what matters, which means that companies need to be really alert to those changes and be ready for them before they come.
And does it matter which version of materiality you use?
It's important, it matters, but not a black and white distinction. So, of course, double materiality is broader. If a company say they adopt double materiality, it sounds better than financial materiality, which leave an impression that the company only concerned about their own financial performance. But after all, double materiality is a label. And a company can claim that it follows double materiality whilst doing very little. So that's a traditional decoupling or greenwashing argument. I mean, double materiality is, of course, an important concept, but by only aligning the position with double materiality is only a starting point. It also matters whether the company will do the follow-up things. And on the other hand, if the company began with financial materiality, it does not mean at a later point they will not pick up on the social and environmental issues. They differs as a starting point, but we also need to look at what companies do at a later point, and also. There are some social and environmental issues are material from both perspectives, like carbon, like human rights or cybersecurity in past few years. Whether the company claim that they adopt financial or double materiality, and these issues are already appear in their report anyhow. So yeah, I mean it's an important distinction, but it's not that black and white.
And the other thing that comes up in this is, and human rights is a really good example that Dee just offered there, is that they're salient, whatever. It doesn't matter about the materiality. Anyone caught in human rights abuses matter because you're taking the perspective of the people caught in the human rights abuse. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of materiality is not the answer to everything. It's almost after you've figured out that part. One of the things I noticed about what Dee said, and I know this for a fact, is that he has done over 200 interviews over a period of time with corporate actors about how they're thinking about their sustainability reporting, but particularly how they're thinking about materiality. And that is a huge data set in terms of interview series, but also that one of the strengths of it is that continuity of it over time as well. And so I think that's maybe a nice place to start our next sort of set of questioning, to ask Dee, what have you found out in that long time series, deep and rich data that you've been gathering?
That's a very good question. I think one of the key findings that I mentioned is materiality as a boundary object, so which differs radically from the understanding of materiality in the context of financial accounting. So one of the papers that was developed out of this longitudinal fieldwork has already been published in the SSRN network. I think the title of the paper is Sustainability Reporting Field Evidence on Materiality. So if the listeners are interested, they can download it. It's available to the public. The key point is to argue that as I mentioned earlier, sustainability reporting is a very early stage phenomenon. There's very little consensus on these important concepts, and materiality is one of them.
Now, you've already mentioned greenwashing. That came up there, and so there's always concerns about corporate reporting being greenwashing. They're trying to make themselves seem the best that they can. I'll come to benchmarking here again, Jan, where there's so many ranking systems when it comes to sustainability reporting or how well people perform in certain ways that you can pick and choose which one you want to be ranked by and report on. So what's your view on the potential problem of greenwashing, Dee?
So there are already a lot of research, a lot of papers on the intentions of doing greenwashing. I feel the insights are already there. I don't think I can say something more than these papers already published. What I feel more interesting is that now the regulators step in and introduce the anti-greenwashing, rules and guidelines, like the some regulations introduced by the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority. So I feel it's more interesting to see how the corporate reporting behaviors will change in the face of these new regulations. Before these regulations are introduced, reporting is more of a voluntary behaviors. It's the corporate reporting managers have a lot of leeway to decide what is put in their report and how these contents and their reporting behavior will change now when the more stringent regulations are introduced. I feel this matters more than because the context has changed, now, right? So that's something I feel more interesting than the concept of greenwashing.
What I also like from our conversations as well is that it's kind of hard to tell. You need to know everything about a company to know if they're greenwashing, and the only way you know about a company is by what they say. And if what they say, you can see the wee loop I'm going down here.
This seems to be the kind of loop I went on with benchmarking
yes,
when we
indeed.
discussed it. I've said that word too many times today.
You have. But there's another concept which is out there as well, is the idea of greenhushing. And so I know that you've thought about greenhushing and you've looked at some of the evidence of greenhushing and some of the work that you've done, Dee. Can you tell our listeners what greenhushing is and how you think about that idea?
I'm doing field work around a beverage company which understates their environmental actions in the reports, and one of the label to describe this is greenhushing, and the other is called brownwashing, both of which means the opposite of greenwashing. Instead of overstating their performance, they rather understating or underreporting their positive actions. I think the purpose of that is a kind of avoidance strategy. So try to avoid drawing attention to the company for various reasons. It can be because of the values of the corporate leaders. They think it's a right thing to keep a low profile. And it can also because of more strategic reasons, maybe because the investors' view on on corporate environmental actions is still uncertain. Some investors think that it's the right thing to do for the companies to be more pro-sustainability, whereas there are also some investors that are more traditional. So because of this, it's safer to be reticent. It's safer to talk less in order to offend some investors who have not changed their mind. That's one of the possible explanations to greenhushing or brownwashing. Why companies sometimes prefer to talk less about their actions.
You've talked, Dee, about changing attitudes over time towards this whole thing, corporate reporting on sustainability. Do you feel as attitudes are changing towards that, maybe greenhushing will become a bit less because attitudes towards sustainability, etc., are going to be a lot more widespread?
I kind of think of the other way around. I kind of feel that greenhushing will be a strategy more widely adopted because of the more and more regulations on this. So the corporate representatives might feel it's safer to avoid being targeted, But before this, when there's an absence of regulation, companies have more freedom. If they have the freedom to say positive things about themselves, why not, right? So if you ask me the big picture thing, I tend to feel that greenhushing will be more widespread than greenwashing in the future.
And one of the things that I noticed in the last couple of days, and I can't remember which company it is, which is probably just as well, there is a company in the US who are suing two of its investors for focusing on environment, social and governance matters. So they're saying that this is not where we think as a company management that we ought to be going. And of course, you always think of the investors as the bosses, and they are in a way because they own the company. But there's now this contestation where the companies might be seeking to sue the investors for focusing too much on environmental and social matters. So I think it's a really sort of hot area. And all of the things that we kind of assumed from the 90s and maybe the last 30 years or so, as the reporting has become more important and as the regulatory field environment has changed, actually a lot more contestation is coming out, which is pretty interesting, but often also quite disappointing. Can you imagine a company suing its owners for being too responsible? That seems like we are about sustainability and business at the Pentland Centre, so you might imagine that I find that quite a frightening and sad idea.
Yeah. It's like some kind of bizarro universe, and yet all too inevitable in some ways.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Then can we look to the future, Dee? And so what do you think the future evolution of expectations around reporting might be?
If we look at the past, begin from the GRI, so that's impact materiality, right? The most traditional corporate reporting is based on the corporate accountability for social and environmental issues to be accountable for their impacts. So that's the what was previously the mainstream, the classic corporate sustainability reporting's focus, right? And then over time, it's kind of giving way to the kind of the risk-based reporting led by the TCFD to look at how, not just how companies are corporate impacts, but how companies are being impacted by social and environmental issues. To me, that's the focus of the TCFD and the risk-based reporting. So moving to the future, I feel what is more interesting is what Jen and I would call the dependency type of reporting. It looks at the two-way dependency. On the one hand, the companies are dependent upon a healthy environmental system, and on the other, a healthy environmental and social system are dependent upon the business activity, and it's a feedback loop, right? So if a beverage company, for example, pollutes the river, and then that's corporate impact on the environment. But over time, the company also, lose the natural resources for their future production. So, which means that the corporate impact at a later point can can come full circle back to influence the company. So I feel that the dependency type of reporting will be something important for the future research, to look at the two-way interactions and the feedback loop.
We're actually harking back to things that JB talked about, that systems view. So if you have a very narrow view of a corporation and you're just looking at these sort of single interactions, then you won't catch that there's this feedback loop that Dee's was referring to.
Yeah, and Dee just throwing another acronym, and I can actually answer what this acronym means. I've learnt this one over the course of this podcast and various other dealings with you, Jan. So the TCFD is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures.
It is indeed, and it's got a new buddy called the TNFD, which is the nature-based equivalent, and we will return to the TNFD at some stage, probably in this podcast series or next year.
Yes, harking right back to one of our earliest podcasts, Duncan Pollard talks about the TCFD and the TNFD. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Everything ties together.
I think Paul is almost becoming an accountant.
Never. Oh dear. My dad would have been delighted if I'd become an accountant.
By the way, given that Jan mentioned the TNFD, it published a lot of good visualizations to show the feedback loop. So if in case the listeners are interested in this concept.
We can throw that in the links for the podcast, and also the paper you mentioned earlier from the SSR, which I just want to double check what SSR means as well, because I made a note on that.
I can never remember. It's where you can put pre-publication versions of your papers so people can access them before because the time between having a really good paper and it coming out in a journal was way, way too long. So it's sort of an early release.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's an academic term.
It is.
Well, I think, though, that is a wonderful point to draw this conversation to a close.
I think so as well. Thank you so much, Dee, for taking the time, especially when you're way down under, to come in on the line and talk to us.
Yeah. I have to ask, you're from New Zealand, Dee is currently in Australia, and numbers upside down there?
Oh.
I thought so. Thank you very much, Dee. So next time we'll be a little bit closer to home than Australia. We'll be actually talking to someone who's based on your own corridor, Jan. I believe she has an office about 2 doors down from you. And so we'll be talking though about data, whether you can trust data and frameworks, and that's going to be with PhD researcher Lauren Thornton.
It's brilliant. I look forward to it.
Until then, I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.